Okay, geometry students, I want to take you through the process of creating your plot of land as well as your greenhouse in Google Draw. So here's what I'd like you to do. The first thing is you go to your drive, you hit new, you create a folder. I'm going to give the folder my name, Kari A, and I'm going to call it Greenhouse Floor Plans. Okay, and I'll create that. And now that I have that, of course, I click on that folder to get inside the folder. And now I'm going to create a new document using Google Draw. So in order to do that, I have to hit the new, go down to more, because Google Draw is not one of the main things that pops up. Go down to Google Drawing, and now I have a grid to work with for Google Draw. I like to have more size, so what I'm going to do is go with a file. I'm going to go down to page setup, and I'm going to change my standard into a 16 by 9, and I'll apply it. Okay, now I have a nice grid that I can use in order to create my plot of land. And each one of you has identified the dimensions of your plot of land, which is roughly the size of your room. So I'm going to click on the shape icon. I'm going to grab a rectangle, and I am going to put the rectangle on the grid. Okay, so I use up a nice portion of the grid, but I leave myself enough space so that I can now put dimensions on the grid. And in order to do dimensions, I have to choose my line feature. And I grab a line and I mark off where I want my dimensions to be. So I put a line here. Actually, hold on one second. Line. Actually, I'm going to get rid of this. I'll delete that. Go to line. And now what I do is I mark off my line where I want my line to be. So that's one side of where my dimensions are. And now I choose the other side, okay, of where I want my dimensions to be. And that's the length. Now I'll do the width. And I mark off a line over here and a line over here. They're not completely perfect, but you get the idea. All right. And now I take my line and I move about maybe 1/3 of the way on this side and 1/3 of the way on this side. And now what I've done is I've marked off the dimensions of the length of my plot of land. And now I use my text box. Click in here, and you have to shorten your text box. You can always move it around. All right, I'm gonna make it a little shorter and a little less wide, and I'll come up here and I'll type into it, and I'll say, you know what? This is 12 feet wide. No, let's do something different. Let's keep it more simple. This is 10 feet, all right? And then I'm going to come back over here, choose my line feature, and I'm gonna mark off the dimensions for my width. And so I'll come over like 1/3 of the way, and then I'll come over the other side and come up about 1/3 of the way. And now what I'll do is I'll use the text feature again into my text box, come over here. Don't worry about where it pops up because you can always slide it over and rotate it, and I'll show you what I mean. But for now, I'm going to make my text box a little shorter and a little less wide, and I am going to make it, I'm going to do a little, all right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click inside, and I'm going to say 9 feet. Okay, so one dimension is 10 feet and the other is 9. Not perfect, because you can tell, you know what, let me make it more proportional, more reasonable. Let's call this 7 feet, because we can see that the ratio is not quite 10 to 9. It's more like 10 to 7. Okay, so now that I've done that, I can bring this text box, I can move it over here. And the cool thing is I can go on my circle and I can rotate it. All right. And then I can adjust my box and make sure that that 7 feet goes right between those lines. So now I have a length of 10 and a width of 7. And now what I have is my land. And so I just click on my text box over here, and I want to label, and I'm gonna go like this. Once again, the text box, I'll move it over so we can see it. The text box pops up in different places, but you can always pull it in, make it less wide and more narrow. And inside the box, I am going to call this land. This is my land that I am building on, which once again, folks have found, and it's roughly the size of your bedrooms. So here's my land. And now what I'll do is I'll go to my arrow feature, and I'll go from land, and I'll say, okay, this is my land. So I'm letting everybody know that's where my land is. Now that I have my land set up, it is time to, of course, put the floor plan for the base of my greenhouse onto my land. So I go back here, hit my shape button, and once again, I'll choose a rectangle, and I'll say, you know what? I want to make my base of my greenhouse take up a large part of my land. All right. So now what we can do is, just like before, we can label our dimensions. And we go over to our line feature, and we, just as before, mark off the lines that we want to use to indicate our dimensions. All right. So that's my length. These are my width. Once again, not perfect, but you got to get the idea of what I'm doing. All right. And now I can, just like I did with my entire land, I can mark off the dimensions of the base of my greenhouse. So, all right, here's the length, and I'm going to say, let's put the text box in, and I'm going to say, okay, that length is about 9 feet. So I'll say 9 feet, and I will slide this text box up here, and you could see, all right, maybe I'll move it over a little bit more so it's centered, and we could see, okay, so this length is 9 feet, and I'm going to call this width 6. All right, so once again, I get my line right here and mark off I use my line to start identifying where I want the width to go. I will, and you can always click on the line and say, oh, you know what, I want to make it shorter, and you can bring it up. All right, same thing down here. You can change the dimensions. Okay, because I want to have more space to put my dimension here. Now I go to my text box. Once again, I click on it, and I'm going to call this 6 feet. Well, you know what? Let me narrow my text box first. All right. Make it a little thinner. Okay. And bring it in a little bit more. Okay. And now I label this 6 feet. Rotate it. And now I can slide it. Thin it out a little bit more. Now I can slide it over into the space. And look at that. I have my dimensions for both my land and my greenhouse. And just like I label my land, I want to label my greenhouse. So I hit text box. I'm going to move it over here. So Once again, you're going to have to adjust the size of your text box. But you reduce the text box like we've done a couple times now. And we're going to call this base of greenhouse. So I might need a little bit more width on my text box. I'm going to bring it over here. And I'm going to say, click in here, and I'm going to say base of, and I'll just come down and say greenhouse. All right. And so now, just like before, I go to my arrow icon and I go from base of greenhouse. I make an arrow. Boom. People can see this is my land. This is the base of my greenhouse. I have the dimensions for the base of my greenhouse. I have the dimensions for my land. Okay. So now, great. The whole purpose of a greenhouse is to put plants in it. And what we just did was step 1.4. We put a greenhouse on our land. The next thing we have to do is figure out where we want our plants to go. And there are 3 things that we have to consider when choosing where we want our plants to go. We have to decide where we want to enter our greenhouse. We want to decide what pathways we're going to put in so that we can place our plants in our greenhouse, but also water the plants that are in our greenhouse. Okay, so I am going to choose my entrance to be over here. So I'm gonna hit this text icon again and adjust it. Okay. And I'm gonna say entrance. This is the entrance to my greenhouse. And once again, choose my arrow. Basically say, I want to enter my greenhouse right here. That's why I enter. All right. And now, where do I want to put my plants so that I can get to them and water them, and get to my entrance, which will also be my exit. So what I do is I use my text box and I say, you know what? I want plants up here. And so I'll make this text box a little wider, okay, and slide it down a little bit because I want to have this be one of the places where I put my plants. So that's going to be one of the sections in my greenhouse where I put my plants. So I'll say, I'm going to come down and say plants, okay, in this section. Okay, and just to make sure that we're clear about that, I will go to this paint icon and I'm going to change the color. I'm going to put that as being green. Now, so we know that this is a section that contains plants, but we have more room in our greenhouse to put plants. So what I'm going to do next is to choose another text box, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to create another section that I want my plants to be in. Okay. I might widen it up a little bit. And you can always adjust the size of your boxes. So, okay, I want that a little wider, more space for my plants. Come down here. That looks good. All right. So now I'm going to come in here and say, and you could also always change your title, but I'm going to come here and I'm going to say, plants in section, I'm going to call this section B. I'm going to go back up and I'm going to call this plants in section A. So now I have a section A and a section B where I want to put my plants. I'm going to use my little paint bucket. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to make this green also. So now look, we have created not only our land, our greenhouse, on our land, an entranceway, and an area where we want to put our plants. Okay, and if you want to kind of get fancy, and And you can add some color. Maybe we make this a deep green. And so now look at that. We know where we're entering. We know where our plants are going to be. We know the dimensions of our greenhouse and our land. So what we just did in terms of identifying where we want our plants is 1.5. So what we did today was 1.4 and 1.5. And I am going to give you the challenge of creating a diagram like this today in class.